Welcome to those of you who are joining us. Over the past day and a half, we've heard from national and corporate leaders about how they're setting a pathway for net zero emissions. Today, I'm thrilled to speak with three incredible local climate leaders who are already showing what's possible and transforming their cities to be cleaner, greener, and more resilient. First, we have Mayor Kate Gallego from Phoenix, Arizona, who ran for mayor on a climate agenda and has set the goal of making Phoenix the most sustainable desert city on the planet. Next, we have Mayor Vi Lyles from Charlotte, North Carolina, who's not only pushing a climate agenda at home, but is co-chair of America's All In, a coalition of 1,800 local governments, corporations, companies, institutions in the U.S. working to cut emissions in half by 2030. And I'll note that just after this panel, she'll be taking part in an event with officials from the Biden-Harris administration to discuss how cities will help meet President Biden's new climate goal. Finally, we're joined by Deputy Mayor Célia Blauel from Paris, who is in charge of ecological transitions, climate, environment, water, and the Seine in Paris, which is quite a lot to handle on her plate. Her mayor and the tremendous work that they're doing on climate was featured last week in the White House Climate Summit. Thank you all for joining us today. So, Mayor Lyles, I wanted to start with you. Last week, President Biden set an ambitious new goal to cut emissions by more than 50% by 2030 in the U.S. Why is this important for cities like Charlotte, and how critical are cities in meeting this target?
First I want to say thank you. I'm really delighted to be joined by the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor of Phoenix and the Deputy Mayor of Paris in having this discussion. As leaders in our own entities, it is very important to be joined by the federal government. In the states anyway, we spend a lot of money and send a lot of money to Washington, D.C. And to have support that's financial as well as policy-based is essential to an urban community like Charlotte, like Phoenix's success in trying to deal with climate change. In 2018, the city of Charlotte adopted the same goals that the federal government has just adopted. So what we now have is a stronger partnership with our federal government, particularly the actions that they're taking about infrastructure. And one of the reasons I say that is because we know that in order to reduce the carbon footprint that we have to change some of the ways that we deal with infrastructure. So the digital divide is very important. The idea of mass transit is important. The ability to connect communities with fast rail, all of those things are important. So the idea of the Biden administration is that we're celebrating and actually commend this administration for the effort that they've taken to actually say that we have a goal that's a 2030 goal, and to actually put the will of the federal government and the president behind it is exceptional right now.
And, we've seen new targets being made by national governments and as we lead up to COP26 in Glasgow. But cities, as we've mentioned, have actually been doing the work. What type of changes are taking place in Charlotte? What have you been championing in your time as mayor?
In the time that I have had the opportunity to shape what we're doing, one of the very first things is to shape the communication and the engagement of our residents, and that we want people to understand how important it is to actually address issues like clean air, asthma, the diseases that are come as a result of having air that we can't have our kids breathe. We have to do this. The virus has given us a moment to really look at disparity differently. And part of this is about climate change and the disparities that are a result of past actions that we can now begin to address. And in Charlotte specifically, we have put together a 2040 mobility plan that's not just about the idea of how do we build roads, but ideas about how do we move people around the city between home and work. So our mobility plan includes bike lanes, it includes sidewalks, it includes trails, but more importantly, it includes the rail mass transit that we need in a southern city to connect people to work and to jobs in a way that makes our quality of life better and our climate change goals more attainable. The other idea is that when you do this kind of work, you create jobs for the future, because the jobs that we have now that are traditional manufacturing and farming and those kinds of jobs are not going to exist. And when we think about the year 2040, so we're planning for the digital connections that are necessary for people to be gainfully employed. Again, I keep it simple, that people ought to have a decent place to live, a job that allows them to make enough money for the lifestyle that they want. And the government's responsibility is to give them an environment that's safe and healthy. And that's what climate change is about, making it safe and healthy for people to have quality of life. And that's our commitment with our mobility plan, our infrastructure plan to support that, and our goals for a really livable city.
Well, I can see why you're speaking at the summit later today in really an eloquent way of simplifying the importance of all the work that we're doing. Mayor Gallego, want to turn to you because Phoenix is literally and figuratively the hottest city in the U.S. It is the fastest growth rate in the country. And last year you had 144 days with triple-digit temperatures. Again, while many leaders are talking about averting the future impacts of climate change is here and now in Phoenix, and you're feeling the extreme impacts of that today. What's happening in Phoenix, and what steps are you taking to protect your residents?
Thank you. Climate change is a big part of why I decided to run for office. I have an environmental undergraduate degree, and my early involvement with the city was doing our first climate action plan about a decade ago. This was before running for office. So I think it's meaningful that the mayor of the fifth largest of the city in the country, in the U.S., comes from that type of a background. It shows that people in Phoenix are taking this very seriously and want to move forward. And we have had such strong support from our voters in doing so. They recently passed what was at the time the largest transit and transportation plan for any city government in the country. We've also had a huge commitment to open space, and Phoenix has more acres of parks than any other city in the United States. So if you need to plan a post-COVID vacation, we'd invite you to check out those parks. But it's a huge financial commitment. Both of those are funded with sales tax that the voters put on themselves. As mayor, it makes our jobs much easier when our voters are with us in moving forward in these areas, and we hope to continue to do so. We believe that a lot of the innovative solutions to addressing climate change will come out of the city of Phoenix. We have a great cluster of companies that do building solutions, whether it be integrating solar in rooftops in a way that might make an interior designer a little bit happier than the current models, to better types of insulation and building materials. You can get walls in Phoenix that are made with recycled blue jeans and are very, very environmentally friendly, but also effective in keeping the appropriate amount of air conditioning, in our case, in the building. And it's been interesting how climate change has impacted us in the city of Phoenix. You've focused on the heat, but we've also had some very extreme weather events. Before serving as mayor, I was on the city council, and my rookie year was pretty rough as a city councilwoman. We had multiple 100-year flood events. We had people whose houses were flooded. They had to move out, tear out the carpeting and walls, move back in, only to be flooded again. One of my most heartbreaking moments my first year was visiting a family who had had a newborn in between floods. And the mother said to me, "I don't know what type of mother I am. I've never had a safe place to bring my baby home to." Those are the heartbreaking moments of why climate change is important, and we're only going to see more of them if we don't do this. I'm a relatively new mom myself, and I found bringing my baby home stressful without any flooding. So just imagine what we're doing to folks who are so deeply impacted by climate change. I think that creates the political will to find solutions.
And we've had a lot of focus over the past day and a half on federal government. Obviously, in the U.S., state governments are really important, and cities can do a lot, but a lot of the money and the powers still resides at the state level. How does that translate into action or obstacles to action in a place like Phoenix? And how do you work with your state partners to accelerate your goals?
Well, I would say Mayor Lyles and I are part of organizations that have been sending a strong message. We need the federal government to work directly with cities. We're innovative laboratories of solutions here, and if we have direct resources, we can do more. For example, Phoenix is very interested in the circular economy, taking things that used to be landfilled and turning them into resources for the future. We have a cool partnership with Keurig, the folks who make pods for your coffee makers, to turn those into new products, and a different one with Renewology to take plastics that used to be hard to recycle and turn them into profit-making enterprises. That's the kind of thing we would do at the local government, not at the state level. But we also need state and federal. A lot of research says for electric vehicle adoption to really take off, we need a federal system where people feel like wherever they go, they're going to have access to charging. It's the same thing with the electric grid. Phoenix is connected to many other states, and Arizona is connected to many other states. We are lucky to be #1 in terms of solar installed on city facilities, but we're a stronger grid if our solar is connected to the wind in California and we can have more diverse resources. The federal government needs to lead in that area with support from cities and states. It's an all hands on deck problem.
Well, America has to be all in, not to steal the thunder from later today's event. Deputy Mayor Blauel, I feel like every week Paris makes another landmark climate announcement. We had the pleasure of working with you for a number of years in my role at Bloomberg Associates. Since being elected, among other things, Mayor Hidalgo has created 870 miles of bike lanes, transformed the Siena into a pedestrian park, which is one of my favorite urban spaces on the planet, retrofitted 50,000 buildings, banned diesel cars in the city by 2024, pledged to remove half of the city's on-street parking spots. You're transforming schoolyards into urban oases to combat heat waves, and champion the concept of the 15-minute city, which we've heard a lot about as more and more cities are looking at that. And I think as people are in lockdown and recognizing what was and wasn't in their community. How has the pandemic impacted your climate work in Paris? Has it slowed things down for you as you had to shift to the public health emergency?
Well, first, let me say my pleasure to be in the same panel that two powerful and inspiring women like these two mayors. And actually, to answer your question, the pandemic was a quite interesting moment because for some people, it was a question like, shall we stop now? Because economic and health is so important. But for the mayor and the team, actually, the question was not a question, because for us, it was definitely a confirmation that the implementation of the climate policies and the resilience of our territories and actually future were the same, two faces of the same coins. I mean, as the mayor says, implementing climate change policies in our cities is about thinking today, improving the situation and the life of the population in our cities, but also thinking about tomorrow, what kind of heritage and things and what planet are we going to leave to our kids. And what Mayor Phoenix said is like a big echo for me, being also a new mom. You cannot think being so much involved the policies without thinking today and tomorrow. This is like part of what is like in our political will and engagement. So what it was for us, it was definitely a momentum to accelerate. For us, Paris climate change policies is about mitigation, adaptation, looking what you said about all the fields of life, but it was definitely an acceleration, especially in two fields. The mobility plan first, because after the end of the first lockdown, last year, we were a bit afraid that people would feel more insecurity and comfortable in going back in their individual cars. So what we did is that we accelerated the bike lanes, the corona lanes, as we call them. And it was not temporary, but definitely final evolution of the cities with the closing of really emblematic streets like the Rivoli streets. And another thing that we also accelerate, is the food plan. We're working for 1 decade on having more local organic food, and actually that link we have with local farmers were a strength during the pandemic, because we had some family with the closing of the open local market that couldn't have affordable food anymore. So that was like a strength. So we're working even more on having that more local food, and actually again having organic local food is also working about more equity and building a new local economy, and that's all part of what is guiding us in the climate policies.
I love how your focus on food and healthy, affordable food tied you into a regional approach to the climate work and to the public health and equity work. It's such an important thing to think about at the different scale. Now, your national government has also taken climate change more aggressively than others. Last week, they proposed ending domestic flights that can be serviced by rail in under 2.5 hours. How helpful is it to have the national government in the larger EU structure supporting climate efforts in Paris and other cities?
Well, this is a call for us for national involvement for years now. Happy that they join us, even if local authorities feel like this is not enough right now. We're quite happy to see the EU taking on board, even if it's not that easy to make more than 25 countries try to define common goals and common action. But the Green Recovery Plan of the EU is interesting. In my mind, the French national government is not enough right now. So we're pushing because I guess we're convinced that we have now to have like the local, national, subnational planet going together, because we have 10 years to go that we have to make the change. So not enough, but definitely necessary, because local authorities have done a lot these last years, and we cannot be on the front line on everything on our own, I guess.
Now, Mayor Gallego, you've made economic growth and the circular economy a centerpiece of the work that you're doing in Phoenix. Economic growth and climate change are often held up as two competing issues where you need to choose one or the other. You're clearly charting a way that demonstrates that to be false. What is the role of the private sector, and how have you been engaging them? You mentioned some of the companies that you've been talking with and working with. How do you see them helping you meet your goals, and what do you need from them as a city leader?
We've had wonderful partnerships with our private sector and also our university partners in philanthropy. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation has been right there with us. Some of our private sector partnerships include Republic Services, which has worked, they manage the processing facilities for our recycling program. And so we think strategically about what we might be able to divert, what we might be able to provide as feedstock to cool businesses of the future. And it's been neat, as we've said this is a priority for us, so many innovative companies have come out and said, we want to partner with Phoenix. Even when I'm invited to speak with particularly European countries, they are looking for places to locate their circular economy posts in the United States and have found that Phoenix might be a partner. So I love that it's becoming part of our economic development strategy, even at the international level. But it's also at the local level. We've had folks come to us and say, we can take your asphalt and recycle it. And that's saved us a lot of money as a city. We're also quite a large city, so we do have a lot of streets. We're more than 500 square miles, so real money that we can put back into programs, which has been wonderful. We did a waste characterization study, so looked at what we were landfilling and found that about 40% of that material could go into composting. So then we were able to take that knowledge and create a facility to process that compost. And now we, instead of having to pay to landfill, we have an economically useful product that prevents us from what was originally trucking in that mulch and soil. And so it's been a win for our city streets, taken more vehicles off and created more economic opportunity for us, helped us diversify our economy.
Now, Mayor Lyles, the past year has not only brought an increased focus on climate in the U.S., but also on racial justice and equity. How have these issues overlapped in Charlotte, and can solving for one help advance the other?
When we think about equity and inclusion and the racial issues that racial justice issues we've got to look at, we've got to examine our past. And our past is grounded in systemic laws and regulations that actually intentionally excluded everyone from participating in governmental decisions. So everyone, if you live in our community, you know that the highway came through your town because you had no voice, or your neighborhood because you had no voice. That plants and industrial zoning occurred because you had no voice in the neighborhoods that you live in. And what we've had to change is in completely understanding that this isn't something that just happened. It was something that was planned and very intentional. And so we have to be just as intentional about moving forward to make those changes. So one of the areas and programs that we have really focused on is the idea that many of the communities and people living in those communities haven't had the opportunity to participate in economic mobility, upward mobility particularly. So we've created a program called Renew, which is a plan for the jobs of the future that are around climate change. I'm so glad to hear all of the work being done in Paris on the circular economy, the way Phoenix is addressing how to use new materials and all of that. So what we're trying to do is determine what are those new opportunities and provide opportunities for people to participate in job training programs. We have partnered with the National Urban League chapter here in Charlotte to create those jobs that they can work in where we can see things. So imagine Charlotte's bus fleet becoming electric. Imagine how we will begin to work with the idea of how do we get people trained in battery maintenance. Electric cars are coming very quickly. How do people get trained in maintenance of an electric car or an electric vehicle? We are working with two of our partners, for example, Duke Energy, who is our local utility provider here. We've entered into an agreement with them because they have some of the same goals that we have. But what do they need in terms of employment? So doing a workforce development plan that's connected to our plan for climate change and finding out where the jobs are going to be here for the future that we can get people prepared to take on now, and be very, very specific in that the goal is to give people the opportunity to have a voice, have that job, that have never had the ability to have that voice before. Systemic change is what we have to do. We have to change the way that we view things and actually incorporate intentionality around racial justice and equity.
Yeah, when you talk about kind of the historic and institutionalized racism, I think redlining is one of the most egregious, invisible ones. And you can actually see the impacts from space, where redline communities are hotter than communities that weren't, because they don't have as many trees, the impacts of heat waves and other infrastructure there. Charlotte has spent a lot of time and political will and funding on housing. How does housing come into play in trying to address both the climate crisis and the history of racism in the U.S.?
You know, all of us have been following the trends that we have in building materials. I don't know that we're there yet, but we want to be prepared and ready to be there when those materials allow for us to create places that we can build in terms of housing that is more sustainable, the opportunity to create less dependence on electricity and gas and all of that. But we've also taken a specific focus around the idea that when we are working on a comprehensive land use plan that actually looks at where do we have those areas where industrial properties are existing and how do we change that into innovation. So I'll give you an example. We have just had the arrival of the announcement of Arrival, which is a British-based global electric company. And we asked them specifically to place their factory where they're going to be building 10,000 electrical vehicles annually. Delivery vans, and we've asked them to locate that factory in a neighborhood that lacked the opportunity for people to have jobs. That is the kind of intentional effort that we're taking to connect the opportunity for how we get building materials, people in decent jobs, and how do we allow people to have a place to live and work. It's just very simple. Again, I say this over and over, a place to live and a place to work that's sustainable and is non-burdened and carries us through the lens of inclusion and diversity.
Deputy Mayor Blauel, anyone who reads the headlines in Paris knows that you have not been able to achieve all the success without opposition and without significant pushback, particularly as you're looking at removing parking spaces or opening it up for other uses than just cars. How do you stay the course when you face that public pushback?
Well, it was really definitely not easy at the beginning of the mayor being into office, like in 2014. But I think that's a global question that we have with all the climate change transformation we make in our cities and that the mayors addressed. If we want to meet the goals of climate change, whatever, we cannot do it if it's only the action, even it's a great action that we're doing as mayors or deputy mayors, but we have to get the people on board with us. So that's a question we try to address a lot these last years, is how we can convince, how we make people being part of this dynamic. It's a lot about what you were saying, having a voice, having that climate democracy, that people, yes, can enter that dynamic and are convinced with us and jump into it, because it's still a challenge to tell people climate change is the issue, is the 21st century issue. It's the opportunity for us to set the path to a more sustainable, but also a more equal society. So we are building places to discuss, debate. It's not easy, but I think ecological transformation is also about democratic transformation. That's what we're dealing with right now.
Now, we've talked a lot about the things that you're requiring to be done. I wonder if any of the cities have incentives. How are you partnering? And Mayor Gallego, you talked about the partnerships you have. How are you incentivizing businesses to adopt different behaviors? Maybe we'll go to Phoenix first on that.
We hope to be a laboratory can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Of innovative technology. The table stakes, the first thing cities have to do is make sure that we have building codes and enforcement that allow innovation. Just because something hasn't been done before doesn't mean it's not a great idea, and we've been putting a lot of emphasis in that area. There's obviously direct subsidies, and the city has helped people get more efficient air conditioners and other appliances. We also want to make sure in areas like electric vehicles, again, that you feel the confidence you can go where you need to go and have the ability to charge it, even though most people do charge at home or at their work. We can provide information, like, for example, the city did a green building competition for a net zero building, and then we put the plans out publicly available to our private sector saying, here's a roadmap, we'll make it free and available to be a little bit easier for you. So we hope to be a good partner in making it simple to do these innovative investments.